Welcome to the Growth Lab. This is the podcast dedicated to the business of beauty and vitality. Today, we are sitting down with Elizabeth Claiborne, the CEO of Nasaclip. It's an amazing product that stops nosebleeds. Let's find out more. This episode is brought to you by MedSpa Accelerator. We help medical practices and med spa clinics solve the bottleneck of inconsistent, unqualified patient leads to achieve a predictable, scalable monthly revenue without staff burnout. We are absolutely thrilled to have Elizabeth join us to discuss the future of patient care and her unique product. Let's get started. Good afternoon, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm good, Jason. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to dive into your story, Elizabeth. I like to frame these conversations simply past, present, and future. We'll
Okay.
start with your origin story, how you got into this demanding, rewarding industry. And then we'll pivot over to the present reality, talk about what's working, what's causing friction, and what's keeping your doors open. And then finally, we'll look at the future outlook and your vision for Nasaclip for the next 3 to 5 years and the biggest strategic moves that you're planning. And that way, we'll be able to cover a full spectrum of building out a successful business. Does that sound like a good roadmap?
Sounds awesome.
Awesome. Great. Well, I would love, and I think all of our viewers here would love to know the story of how you transitioned from being an ER physician to founding Nasaclip about 10 years ago.
Yeah, it is a long story. I first thought of the idea for Nasaclip when I was a resident in emergency medicine back in 2015. And I was really struck at that time by the number of people who came to the emergency department for nosebleeds. Believe it or not, we see about 500,000 ER visits a year in the US annually for nosebleeds. It's about 0.5% of visits, meaning 1 in 200 people walking into an urgent care or ER setting is for a nosebleed. And I just couldn't believe that people showed up for such a simple problem and would wait hours potentially to see me. But when I dug into the problem a little further, I realized that a lot of patients are mismanaging their nosebleeds. They almost do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. So they'll frequently put their head backwards when it's supposed to be forwards. They'll pinch up here on their nasal bridge instead of over the flare of their nostril. And most importantly, they don't hold constant pressure. You need about 10 to 20 minutes of uninterrupted pressure to stop a nosebleed, which sounds really simple, but it's hard to hold your nose for 10 minutes and not let go a little bit. And then if you
Yeah.
combine that to the fact that nosebleeds are very common in kids age 2 to 10, and then older adults 55 to 80 who might be on blood thinners, that's really the least likely population to manage that problem well. So I think they panic because they're doing the wrong things. The bleeding doesn't stop and it can look scary. And so they show up to the ER thinking they'll be seen right away because they're bleeding. But for me, as a busy ER doctor, this is not a gunshot wound or a heart attack or a stroke. These patients often have to wait. And it was frustrating for everyone involved. If you talk to any kind of urgent care ER doc, you're going to hear them moan and groan if epistaxis shows up because it's messy, cumbersome, and it's a lower acuity problem, but it's really time consuming to take care of. And so I was trained as a resident to tape together like two tongue depressors to make a clip. And I thought to myself, there's just no way there's not a device for this. I mean, we are discharging more than 90% of these patients. They usually would not even need to be in the healthcare setting if they had a solution at home. And so I thought there should be a better solution. And that is where the idea for Nasaclip came from. So my device provides external nasal compression with intranasal sponges that can be medicated with a vasoconstrictive agent like Afrin spray or oxymetazoline. A lot of people know that as a nasal decongestant, but it's an alpha agonist vasoconstrictor, very helpful in stopping nosebleeds, but it's hard to get anything up the nose when it's bleeding. So if you're having a nosebleed, this is our reusable device, which is more for consumers. We have both adult and pediatric sizes, and it includes these soft medical grade sponges that you can add a vasoconstrictor to. It also does work without medication because compression is the mainstay of treatment. So if someone
Okay.
checks into your clinic, or even if they're at home, you just have them simply clear their nose of clot, insert the nasal sponge, rotate this into place, and squeeze shut. And just like that, it holds firm, constant, uninterrupted pressure. But you can see my mouth's clear, my eyes are clear. I could relax, right? So I actually put them back out the waiting room usually for 10 to 20 minutes, have them come back, release, check for bleeding. If they're still oozing, it actually can be rinsed and reinserted, or you can add a more robust agent like TXA if you need. And then when you're done, it disassembles so you can throw away the sponge. And the nice part is that this component can actually go home with the patient and there are sponge refills available. So as I mentioned, we sell it both in a kind of reusable kit, which is available on Amazon and our website, which is only
Okay.
25 for a device and 7 sponges, or we have single use, which is more for our hospitals and medical providers in both our adult and pediatric ages 2 to 13.
Okay.
Buys it. So that
We
is technology.
we will definitely put a link below for that product. Now, quick question, the one that you were just demoing, is that the metal one or is that the plastic one?
This is the plastic one, yeah. The initial, device that we had was a metal device with a memory metal. It actually looked
The
like
N1,
this.
right?
Yeah, but we made it reusable really after getting a lot of feedback from the market because people were actually just reusing the clip multiple times and trying to wash the sponges off or clean them with alcohol and reuse them. And we're like, please don't do that. And so we redesigned in order to actually make it reusable. So definitely that was part of the iterative process, I would say, for me as a physician entrepreneur. And, just to talk a little, Jason, to your point of like where I came from, none of this was something I expected to do. I came up with this as a resident, but I really didn't do much with it for the first 5 years. So 2015, I thought about it. I did secure my patents. So I always tell everyone if you have an idea, the first two things you really need to make sure is that you have a unique novel idea and that you protect your IP because upfront that's going to be the most valuable thing. And the second thing is to really make sure you have a product market fit, that someone's actually going to pay money for your solution if you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into actually
Yeah,
developing it. And so I did a
yeah.
lot of preliminary kind of accelerator programs, as well as the NSF, the National Science Foundation I-Corps. But those were on the back burner for many years. And it wasn't until about 2020 when I started to fundraise that I shifted my career from being a full time academic emergency physician to running the company. And then in 2023, I went full time. So since that time, we've been full time and we've been in the market for almost 2 years now. And I think what's most amazing to me is I made it for my pain point as an ER doc, but there are all these other sectors that has been applicable to sports medicine. So we have NBA and WNBA trainers using us.
Yeah.
Just in a boxing tournament over the weekend, and I'm like trying to get more involved in a mixed martial arts and boxing. We're on all Disney cruise ships and parks. So, like, event and travel medicine is very popular. And then the everyday parent and caregiver. We launched on Amazon in mid last year, and it's really been taking off. So I think I actually underestimated the utility of just the everyday parent or caregiver and wanting to have this simple, easy to use solution at home.
Wow. So it sounds like you're really ramping up right now and really scaling just
That's
in
right.
recent years. And I want to speak to the point that you mentioned a little bit earlier. And I've seen this on Shark Tank so many times before where someone comes up with a great product, but they don't have it patented. Right. And then someone comes along and they can just go ahead and duplicate it and steal their idea. So kudos to you for actually securing that patent. I think that's great business advice before you're actually, getting, round seed investors and angel investors on board to actually develop the product a little bit more. So that's great.
Thank you.
Is there really a season for nosebleeds or can it happen like year round?
It definitely happens year round, but there is a seasonal nature. And we're actually right now, it's February. In the middle of winter is the peak time for nosebleeds. The most common cause of nosebleeds is actually dry air. So when the humidity drops and people move into heated indoor spaces, that's when you'll see the majority of nosebleeds. There's also like a subset of kids that tend to get nosebleeds. I actually have a 5-year-old who's a frequent nosebleeder, and she's like my little Nasaclip model. She's a redhead. Redheads tend to also have a lot of nosebleeds. But you'll definitely have certain parents where they're like, oh my gosh, yes, in the wintertime, like I get nosebleeds all the time, or my kid is getting nosebleeds all the time. I think outside of that, there's certain activities, obviously, with trauma or sports where you'll see it more often. And then I think the other patient populations that we tend to see it in frequently are those with high blood pressure, folks that have some type of blood disorder like HHT or hemophilia. And then, as I mentioned before, those on anticoagulants, especially Coumadin or warfarin. In the ER, we'll tend to see the older populations because they tend to bleed a lot if they're on blood thinners. They're the ones who might be bleeding for a couple hours and
Yeah,
decide to
that
show
makes
up. But
sense.
I think
Yeah.
at home, like the younger population, it happens a lot, and they just kind of try to piece it together. In either case, I think our solution provides a really helpful solution that would avoid having to come to the ER and seek out that medical attention.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. Now, I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to know kind of what the difference was aesthetically and functionality wise between the N1 and the N2 plastic models. What was that
Yeah.
difference?
So when we first designed the device, I was asked like, "Well, how did you come up with it?" And essentially, what I did is I had seen a kayak clip, a clip that kayakers use to prevent water from going up their nose, and I gave that to
Oh,
my engineering team and was like, "I think it should look like this, but you have to add the sponges, and it needs to be like adjustable and start in an open position." So they actually really dissected that clip, and this was the first model we came up with, which was like a memory metal. So this has like the very similar sponge. The sponge is actually exactly the same. It goes in the nose. But for this one, it pitches it to place and it holds the shape through a
It
memory.
holds it there. Okay.
Yeah,
The
the difference
plastic
for
one
this
doesn't do
is
that?
that you can't reuse this, like, after a certain period of time, like, this metal is just gonna, like, warp and not use it correctly, and the sponges could come off, but they're not designed to really be reusable in the way that our current device is. So after we were launched into the market, I was primarily thinking about the hospital space, which would be just single use, which this works fine. But, I didn't think about the consumer who would want to value a reusable device. Plus, our device is plastic, which makes it more applicable in sports medicine where they don't like having any metal, on a player. And in addition to that, I actually think the new device is lighter weight so it actually holds really tight and an athlete running around could keep it on play in place or even a little kid that's running around. So there were several design features that we iterated into the design after getting that initial market feedback. And I think that's how, you got to look at the evolution of the iPhone or any technology. If you look at the beginning product,
Of
this is
course.
why I tell people you can always like work on your baby and try to make it perfect. It's like it will never be perfect. Like you eventually just have to like take the plunge, believe in yourself. And sometimes you don't know what changes you're going to make until you get into that market and you get feedback from your users.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what's the biggest goal for the business in this calendar year of 2026, Liz?
Yeah. So this year we're very heavily focused on our revenue growth. I want to break 1 million in revenue this year. Historically, about 70% of our business has been B2B, meaning like the hospital space, the cruises, the amusement parks, and other businesses, and 30% D2C. I think we're going to see an uptick in our D2C, our consumer sales, especially on our Shopify store
Okay.
at nasaclip.com as well as Amazon. But I also think we're bringing on larger distributors, which is a huge part of our growth. So we have some government distributors because the military is another space that we can distribute to, in
Yeah.
addition to healthcare distributors in both the medicine, sports, as well as kind of the outdoor space. And all of those are meant to like build the brand awareness because I think the biggest challenge is nobody knows about Nasaclip, right? They don't know that it exists. They don't know about any particular solution most of the time for nosebleeds. But as soon as they encounter it, they're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to have that in my first aid kit. And so we're really driving to have brand recognition, break 1 million in revenue, and reach profitability, which is such a key milestone for me as a startup because I've been actively fundraising for years now. And it's one of
Oh,
the more
okay.
challenging aspects of being a startup founder. And it would
Mm.
mean a lot to break that threshold of profitability, knowing that like the business is sustaining itself. And now I'm positioned to continue to grow and not be in jeopardy of having the business shut down because I don't have enough funding or enough runway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, tell me a little bit more about the cost of the plastic one that's most common. I think that's the main one in production right now, right? Okay, what
Yeah.
for B2C, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So, this device is also because it is plastic and we're injection molded. One of the keys is that as I ramp up my production, it brings down our COGS, our cost of goods significantly, and we can pass those savings on to the customer. So, if you were to order our reusable kit, which is like a device and 7 sponges, that retails for about $25. And I really
Okay.
wanted it to be an approachable price point that an everyday parent could use. Now, interestingly, the single use are around 15, depending on like, obviously, that's the retail price. So a lot of healthcare organizations, schools, they're going to get much more discounted price because they're ordering in bulk. But that's for like the single use. Of note, though, the current devices that we use in hospitals that might be like nasal tamponade devices, such as the Rabbit Rhino, are much more expensive than that, double than that. And they also have to be applied by a mid-level or a physician, which requires more time of your most expensive personnel in a healthcare setting. So in the hospital space, they still really love us because we're cheaper. We can be applied and triaged by a nurse or tech, which speeds up time to treatment and therefore discharge. And because it's over the counter, the device can be sent home. You can send an extra in home with the patient, which prevents them from bouncing back. These are all quality metrics that hospitals are really interested in. So overall, it's like better, cheaper, faster, higher quality care, I think, which is the name of the game in healthcare. So to tackle both of those markets, we had to have pricing architecture that appeals to both the consumer as well as to our B2B customers.
That's great. And we're going to be putting the links for both of the B2C, Shopify, Amazon, whatever else you have at the link in the description below. Where is some of the strain and chaos showing up currently?
Yeah, I touched upon it a little bit. I think a lot of my current challenges relate to trying to grow with really limited capital. So
Mm,
we have raised a little over 4 million for this company, which is not an insignificant number. And especially because I think a lot of your potential viewers may not be familiar with the startup or venture capital ecosystem.
Mhm.
In particular, raising money as a female founder and even a Black female founder is incredibly challenging. We currently only give about 2% of venture capital to women, which I was not aware of this at all. That like of the billions of dollars that go into investing in startups, a very small percentage of that goes to women, and even less than that, 0.34% of that goes to Black women. And so, just to articulate how challenging it is to fundraise, on average, if you're talking to like a typical white male founder, they might speak to about 7 people to get like a yes or a return on investment. Whereas coming from my demographic, we're usually speaking to 10 times that amount. So 70 people to get one yes. So in the process of
Wow.
manufacturing, sourcing, building it, trying to do sales, I'm also constantly fundraising in a really challenging environment. But I would say, Jason, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about having a really strong business and hopeful large exit, we can talk about the future because I want to exit at $1 billion, is to really illustrate how amazing female founders can be, especially when given early access to capital. Because statistically, we actually do great in business. And you can see this in the numbers. Like women tend to be faster to revenue, faster to profitability. They can be greater multiples on their exit. But I think there's a little bit of an unconscious bias that's at play in our society where a lot of venture capitalists are typically, of a demographic that's very white male. And so they invest in what they're comfortable in because it's a risk adverse place. And so we need to have both more diversity in the how the VCs are represented, who's giving the money, but also in the companies that are really successful so that it shows others that like, hey, I'm not asking for charity when you invest in me, right? Like I am going to bring return on your dollar and that I am a very strong businesswoman. And so that's really a lot of what I think fuels my passion currently. Like obviously I think I'm introducing a simple but elegant solution to nosebleeds, which is a very common problem. But outside of that, I really hope I serve as a role model, as a strong entrepreneur and founder that like other women and people of color can look up to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Great. And that reminds me of another guest that I recently had on, which is Dr. Linda Amerson, that has a hair and scalp clinic in Texas.
Okay.
And yes, and she's amazing. And if you haven't seen that episode, please go ahead and check the channel and go ahead and view that episode. It's amazing, and so I can definitely relate with that. You remind me of some of the similar challenges that she's going through as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
If you could, let's talk about wasted time and increased productivity, right? If
Mhm.
you could instantly eliminate one repetitive task, one time sink that distracts you as the, CEO from working on the business, whether because obviously you wearing a lot of hats right now,
Yes.
right? So, so what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like the your early stage founders are like the end all be all of everything. Like I'm the probably the best salesperson. I'm the person who's innovating. I'm helping with the manufacturing. And so my time is very valuable and very limited. And I'm also a finite resource. So I cannot like duplicate myself as much as like I would love to. So I
Uh-huh.
think the biggest time sink that I have is just like managing my inbox with all of the incoming emails and parsing through what's something I really should be looking at and what's, spam, what's like not a qualified lead, what's, someone who should be able to book time on my calendar and who shouldn't. And I have built a little bit of a team around me. So we have 4 full-time employees currently, a couple of part-time, and then a lot of our sales are 1099 contractors. But I still find that like if I were to add up a number of like hours per day, that I'm just like parsing through like the junk to get to like where the actual valuable nuggets are in true sales opportunities or actual partners that I need to talk to, it seems like there's a lot of wasted time there. And then I think that for me, having an ability to have someone else vet that or another way for that to be vetted, so only the things that should be funneled to me reach me, would be super valuable.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. That's a fantastic answer. Gosh, do you ever see yourself going back to ER medicine at all? Oh, but you mentioned because you mentioned something about exiting at 1 billion, right? So I
Mhm.
was just curious if you're gonna ever go back to being an MD.
Well, I never quit.
Okay.
I actually have never quit. I'm a really actually someone who believes that as a clinician, especially if you're providing something that's used in the clinical space, you don't have to quit. Particularly in my specialty, emergency medicine, we work shift work. So I have always practiced. I have never lost my credentials. And I think it actually helps my reputation when I'm selling into healthcare organizations that I am a practicing clinician. Because I'm also
Mhm.
talking to other directors and hospital admin, and they want to know that, I'm using something that I would actually utilize in my everyday ER shift. So I do
Yeah.
about 4 shifts a month in the ED. And
Okay.
I do that for a number of reasons. Obviously, I spend a lot of time, training to be a physician. I find that now that I don't have to do it as often, I enjoy it more. And then I think that certainly having those patient interactions still keeps me humble and keeps me grounded. And one of the most rewarding things that I've seen is to be able to like actually have my own device in the healthcare systems. Because I recently got approval for the hospital system that I'm in. Like my own device is being utilized in the ER. And so when a nosebleed patient shows up, I go into our ENT cart and I pull out Nasaclip and I get to use it on a patient, which is like so gratifying. The
Yeah,
other
gotta
reason
be.
though, speaking to the future and the exit, that I consider, maintaining practice a really important part of being a physician innovator is my ideas come from my clinical work. I initially designed Nasaclip to carry medications that were helpful in the setting of nosebleeds, like chemostatic or vasoconstrictive agents. But once I had the device, I was like, it's actually really good at deploying any intranasal drug. So the first one I thought of as an ER doc was Narcan or naloxone, the opioid reversal agent. So I know that, when a drug overdose is happening and let's say fire, police, EMS, or even a bystander is trying to revive somebody, they'll spray Narcan up the nose and often they have to redose it. And it's for a couple of reasons. Both the drugs on the street are stronger now, laced with fentanyl, all types of crazy stuff. But also when you spray something up the nose, a lot of the medication dissipates. It's not like actually fully absorbed over the nasal mucosa where it needs to be absorbed to be effective. But if you imagine instead of a spray, you're using Nasaclip with the sponges that go in the nose, they maintain contact with the nasal mucosa, and then you put the system under pressure, better absorption over time, more likely to be effective on that first dose, which can save lives. So, in pipeline for our company, we're going to have a future focus on modifying and optimizing Nasaclip as an intranasal drug delivery platform. And this would be applicable not just to something like Narcan, but like, analgesics, so pain medicine, benzodiazepines for seizure or anxiety, ketamine, allergy, migraine, even our vaccines we deploy intranasally. And especially for kids where we may not be able to establish IV access quickly in an emergency, giving meds intranasally is the fastest way to get something on board to kind of mediate and something that a medication that needs to be given right away. Like if a kid is having a seizure or a kid has a severe injury and they're trying to be brought to the hospital and we need some pain meds on board. So that is how
Yeah.
I feel like we have our pathway to $1 billion exit because when drugs are modified in the way they're delivered, it can extend patent life extension to those companies. And so that's very attractive to the pharma companies, in addition to making it more efficacious and helping with compliance with those types of drugs.
I did have a question about the device itself in terms of the delivery, because so it's not just sponges that are in there. You're mentioning different drug delivery system intranasally. So how does the device deliver the drug intranasally? So it's not just the drug in the sponge
So
then.
the
Could
whole
you describe that process?
Yeah, the whole idea is that you would actually modify the device and pre-soak the sponges with the particular medication.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the sponge is the delivery mechanism. So instead of just spraying it up the nose, you'd have a sponge that's preloaded with the Narcan and you put it in the nose and then that's how it's delivered.
I
So
see.
it's a
I see.
different regulatory process though. Our current device is a class 1 510K exempt device, meaning we're FDA registered, but we didn't have any regulatory hurdles or special studies we had to do because there were preemptive devices that already existed on the market. Predicate devices, what I meant. But for this new type of drug delivery, we would have to do some trials. It's a little bit more of an arduous, longer process to test and make sure how the drug is being deployed and all the pharmaceutical concerns when it comes to drug delivery. But as I said, huge upside and huge market. This is a $43 billion market with intranasal drug delivery.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see the opportunity for you.
Mhm.
Now, what is the biggest challenge that you have in translating the excitement that you have, right, for the product that a potential customer sees from an ad post or maybe something like on the website about that, about, maybe it's a small short video of them seeing it being used and then how do you translate that excitement from that into a high touch experience that they actually reach out to the company, like, for example, if it's being resold on Amazon, maybe it's got like a high impact video. How do you translate that excitement in your advertising and marketing for the product?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain value propositions that Nasaclip brings that a lot of other products don't. Like we're a physician, an emergency physician designed product. So I designed Nasaclip from my experience as an emergency physician and a mom, right? A mom that deals with a kid that has nosebleeds all the time. So
Mhm.
understanding how it's going to be effective, why it's going to be effective, really drew from my clinical knowledge. I think in addition to that, we're the only reusable option on the market. So if you're looking at value over time and something that can be sturdy and be used by multiple members of the family, there's a lot of, I think, excitement that's translated there. And then I think lastly, us having both adult and pediatric sizes and being able to kind of treat the whole family is really attractive. But I think the challenge, right, is to make the brand trusted, right? So I want them to trust me, I think, because I'm a physician and a mom. Hopefully they buy into that. But ultimately, it's like you want them to get the product and experience it for themselves so they see how it works. So building our reviews online as well as just word of mouth, I find that really the community and the word of mouth, someone maybe watching this podcast or someone who is like, that's interesting, and they give it a try and then they tell other people, that's really the most powerful voice in moving forward our brand awareness.
Okay, that's fantastic. Now let's talk about goals for a minute. You mentioned the goal for the business is to scale to $1 billion in revenue for your exits. If you looked at the business today, what is the single heaviest anchor that's dragging that progress down? What is one system that if it's fixed, would it solve half the other problems on the list?
Yeah, I think that so just so you know, when you exit a business, it's not your revenue, it's usually an exit of your multiple. So like in this industry to exit at $1 billion, you need to have a revenue and then that's multiplied by about 5 to 8x of that revenue. So I would want to try to get, into the hundreds of millions of revenue in order to have $1 billion exit, which is still
Okay, gotcha.
it's still a huge leap. So to your point, to your question, I would say right now, the thing that's hanging me up the most is just efficient manufacturing. So it's very expensive. We make the device in the United States, which is really expensive, but I want a high
Oh,
quality
yeah, it's not
product.
made in China. Gotcha.
It's right. So very expensive that way, but I still think there's efficiencies of scale that can help us to produce more volume and then be able to kind of bring down those margins. And I think that that's important because if I don't have great margins on the product, I cannot tap into the distribution networks that would drive that volume. So for
Mm.
us, for example, enter the retail space because a lot of people are like, well, are you at, Target, Walmart, CVS? And that is in our plan. But to get to those distribution points, you have to have strong e-commerce sales and you have to have the infrastructure to build, at mass like that. And so right now, that's like a big hurdle for us to get over in order to reach that revenue that we were talking about and the eventual $1 billion exit.
So it's not a people problem, it's a system process problem. Is that right?
Right. It would be both, right? It's like, eventually, if you scale large enough, this would be the actual manufacturing could be done with, not people, with robots, right? But you have to be at a really high
Mm.
level to like integrate that kind of automation into your manufacturing process. From right now, like there's actual human beings that put these devices together, and that's what's really expensive.
I understand. Wow. Well, that has been a fantastic breakdown, Liz. And thank you for being so candid about the operational reality of the manufacturing process, the funding. I really do appreciate that. And I think we've covered a lot of ground today from your origin story to the future of your nasal clip device. And I know that our audience is going to get immense value from this. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the recorded portion of the Growth Lab.